I apologise there hasn't been a update on the Pacific set for a while. Lockdown ended and so did my spare time, and so I have pretty much just left it where it lay. Now I do have some footage that I need to edit up, but editing is actually even harder than doing the work on the radios, I've discovered. So it's going to take me a little while. There is one pretty much ready to go. In the meantime, I thought I had a gentleman who contacted me via email and said, do you repair radios? And I am pretty sure what I said was something along the lines of, I can, but I try not to because I don't really have the time to do it. There ensued a few emails back and forth where he said it was just a small ultimate radio and it just needed a power cord, and he couldn't find anyone to do it. And so somehow I went from saying no, I can't do that, to okay, sure, I can do that, but I'd like you to come out and sort of, be here with me so we get it done. While you watch, you can take a look inside. I'll explain a few things about the set, and I thought that way at least he'll come out. It'll take maybe an hour, a couple of hours. We'll get it done and he can take it away again and it's done. Oh dear, I don't know what happened, but not only is he not here, he's dropped this set off, and he's also dropped this set off, which also needs repair. So now I have an Ultimate RCD to put a new power cord in and do a service on, and I've got this STC set, which is an Australian one, to do as well. I believe that the only problem with this, he did say that it had extensive work done in the past by a company that used to exist in town doing vintage radio repairs, but they are no longer there. And he said that the only thing that they didn't do that it still needs is the dial pointer catches, so it swings through the sort of bottom part of the arc, but it won't go up the sides. So it could just be a loose pointer on the shaft, or it could be binding on something. We'll take a look and sort it out. But I thought that I may as well bring you guys along and do a little repair blog of sorts. So you just stand by while I get things set up. I'm going to have to work out here in the outside part because the Pacific is sort of set up all over the bench, and if I move that I'm going to forget where things are. So we'll just set the soldering iron up out here and have a look. Alright, so I apologise for the poor lighting, the horrible camera angle, the lack of Pacific radio videos, the birds chirping, the cows driving past, probably the helicopter that will decide to fly over. This is not ideal, but we'll get her done because that'll keep this guy happy. So, a little bit about this set. These were pretty common in the mid-50s. I can't remember the exact year, but we'll pull some service information out and have a look a little bit later on. But this set design, Radio Limited made a large number of them, and they slapped whatever badge they were making them for at the time. This one just happens to be an Ultimate, so it's their house brand. You'll find these probably in Golden Knight, Courier, Rolls, Skyscraper, any one of the main brands that were made by Radio Limited. They were super into badge engineering by this stage of the game. They'd create a radio and slap a badge on it and call it that, and then they'd create exactly the same radio and slap a different badge on it. They didn't even bother to change the cabinets around this time. They just all look the same. So this is, I think, right, Model RCD. With Radio Limited sets, the serial number starts with either 2 or 3 letters typically. For most of their production, that was how it was done, and those letters indicate the chassis model. Things worthy of note on these: they're quite a nice escutcheon, but the escutcheon cracks around the screws, and you can see there's a bit of plastic missing here. There's a crack here and here. And it's getting away pretty lightly this set because typically every single screw hole will have cracked and the bit of plastic will have disappeared. Just seems to be something they do over time. So if you're working on these and you have to take the escutcheon off, be really careful. We'll take a look inside. So fairly typical 50s set. As you can see, the power cord is pretty shot. We'll replace and relegate this one to the bin. It's had a new plug put on it at some point. That's a fairly modern Clipsal one. You can see it's got the plastic sleeves on the phase and neutral lines, which is the requirement for plugs these days here in New Zealand, and I think Australia as well. Yeah, at this stage apparently it goes fine. It doesn't have any other problems. It's just simply that it needs a power cord. I did mention to the gentleman that it's probably worth giving it a service and just checking it while we've got it on the bench, and he was okay with that. So I'm going to whip the knobs off, take the chassis out, and we'll take a quick look inside, see what we can see. If it's had work, that's great. If it hasn't had work, then we may just need to at least look at the power supply and maybe the coupling cap to the output. So one thing he did mention to me is that he thought one of the dial lights was out. Out indeed. It's lying in the bottom of the cabinet. So if we take a look at the chassis, set the cabinet aside for the moment. Now, this dial pointer was also stuck, but the power cord caught it on the way out and has just lifted it off the plate, so that's come free. We'll talk about that in a minute. Somebody has just taped that in place, and I'm not quite sure what they were doing. It looks very badly mangled, not just on the end of that wire. So we will re-terminate that and sort that out while we're here. We'll do the power cord. Like I said, this dial pointer was jammed and wasn't spinning. I forgot he'd also asked me to take a look at that. You can hear a bit of squeaking, and also it's in the wrong place, so we'll sort that. But what happens on these sets, metal slides across the top of the dial, and they put a little bit of grease or something on it from factory just to give it a wee bit of lubrication, but that grease goes rock hard over time, and particularly if they sit for a long time and the grease goes hard with the pointer sitting in one spot, it becomes more of a glue than a grease, and that's what's happened in this instance, I think, because you can kind of see where it was attached to it. So best thing to do here, or best thing I think for me to do, and typically what I'll do with this, is either clean it off really well, get in there with some isopropyl alcohol and just make sure that that area is perfectly clean, and then use either some graphite from a soft pencil or a bit of 3-in-1 machine oil, just a really thin smear, just something to give it a wee bit of lubrication. Put it on a tiny drop on a cotton bud, and then I just wipe that cotton bud along both sides and across the top. Really looking at this set, it's not even that dusty, so I think it's probably been in a really good environment. I don't think there's going to be too much we'll need to do to it. So, having a look underneath, yes, it's had some work done because the main electrodes have been replaced, looks like in the 80s or 90s, and yep, that's been replaced as well. So the electrodes have been replaced, but the set is still full of paper caps. These are all Ducon, made in New Zealand. By this stage, I think Ducon had a factory in Auckland or Wellington, I don't recall where, and some of them look like they've been a little bit warm. Other than that, set's looking really good. I think those electrodes will probably be fine, so we'll check that. Power cord will be easy to replace. It's actually got a factory clamp in it. They were clamping cords by that stage. And interestingly enough, if you've seen my Rolex video, the clamp that I chose to go with is identical, so it probably actually came out of a later model Ultimate set and into the parts bin at some point in the past. This is what we got. It doesn't look too bad. I think I am probably going to recap it because the cost is not great, but the cost of not doing it, I want this job to go away and not come back. I want the gentleman to be happy with it and be able to go and listen to it and enjoy it. I think he said that this set, either this set or the STC, I don't recall which from the conversation we had, but it was his grandmother's radio. So I'm going to recap this. I'm not going to bother to record it, or if I do, you're about to see it in very fast time, just for completeness. But you've seen me recap radios before, you've seen other people recap them, you know how I do it. I tend to be quite happy with a J-hook, other people not so much. Again, each to their own. I've watched people take perfectly good caps out because they were J-hooked and replace them with perfectly good caps that weren't J-hooked. You know, you've got to do these in the way that you're comfortable with, and if you're not comfortable with J-hooks, then by all means do them a different way. I'm quite happy with using J-hooks when necessary. Now, having said that, these sets are a lot more compact than some of the older ones, and I may not need to. I only J-hook where the leads on the modern component are not long enough to get where they need to go. This is pretty compact, and if you look at some of these caps in here, the start and finish points are pretty close to each other, so there's a really good chance that I actually won't need to J-hook anything. I'll be able to just connect to either end. And I know the likes of, say, Mr. Carlson's Lab P doesn't like J-hooks. And the reason I last heard him state was that they could have just removed the wire from either end and fitted the cap properly. That I agree with. I don't agree with leaving pigtails in place from a termination point if the new component's legs are long enough to reach. Bearing in mind that there is restoration and there is repair, and this is not a restoration. There's absolutely no need to restore this set. This is a repair, and if a serviceman sometime in the future wants to restore it, then absolutely you'd do it as properly as you could, and you might even make some new old Duke-on caps. And one of the things with the Vintage Radio project that I'm trying to do is get images of how the sets looked when they came from the factory, so that in the future a restorer can look and see, that's what it looked like. This is the type of caps they use. They use Duke-on caps, and this is where they all were. So when I'm actually putting photos of sets on Vintage Radio, what I try and do is get under chassis shots and try and get original shots as well. So quite often, if you're looking at the site, you'll see that it's got pictures of restored sets, but I'll favour the pictures of the original sets, even if the set's shabby and untidy. And the reason for that is just simply that one of the things I'm trying to achieve with that site is giving future restorers, once everyone who's forgotten how they originally looked has gone, and that time is rapidly rolling around, it's going to give future restorers a glimpse at what they looked like originally, and that's part of what I'm trying to achieve there. So, an important note, if you send me photos of a set that you've restored, I'll definitely put them on if I can. I'm trying to display the sets as they were primarily, and how they can be as a secondary sort of resource for people who might want to modify a set and make it look better. Or modify a set and make it work with modern equipment. You might want to put Bluetooth in it, and maybe you've painted a radio to suit your decor. And I do see that quite often. Depending who you talk to, some people will be deeply offended by that. It's called hot rodding, where you sort of modernise and upcycle a radio. Some people get very offended. I'm not one of them, unless it's a really rare set. If somebody emailed me a picture of a Pacific Elite that they painted black with silver stripes and put a TV aerial out the top and put a robot face on the front, I'd cry. Most of us probably would, but a set like for this one, for example, I mean, they were made by the thousands, and there's still heaps of them out there. You see them come up all the time. So if somebody had a black and red kitchen and they painted this radio black and red and did a tidy job of it, great, I have no problem with that. By this stage of the game, these were very, very common household appliances. They're not rare. One day they probably will be, and then you can strip the black and red paint off and take it back to a nice lacquer finish and No harm, no foul. Well, ramble. I guess you get what I mean. I've actually forgotten what I mean, but anyway. First job. Power cord. You're out of there, sunshine. So we will reuse the plug because that is a modern plug and it's standards compliant with modern electrical standards. We're going to put that dial light back on. I'll do that last. The bulb's actually missing from it. I'll have to have a look and see if I've got some 6.3 volt bulbs. Alright, so there's the cable clamp. Almost identical to the one that we used on that Rolex set. Just have a little hole in the chassis that pokes into and then it folds down and screws in place. The grommet, the mains grommet, is actually pretty soft and supple, so I'm not going to replace that. That's in good nick. Alright, so the only power cord that I've got that's even remotely age appropriate for this set is some good old New Zealand made stuff from Abcal. But unlike that stuff I used on the Rolex set, it's nice and flexible. This was typically found on irons and jugs and toasters and things, I think. This is really, really nice. It's nice and supple. I'm going to put it's a really nice rubber sheath on this. It's very flexible. I am enjoying working with it. Now, you want to be really, really careful. You can see it's been really carefully cutting through there, and it's popped through to where the black wire is inside. Because it's rubber, it's not the easiest thing to cut, and if you cut too hard, you will blow through and cut the insulation of the wire inside. If you do nick that insulation of the wire inside the outer sheath, you want to cut the whole thing off and start again. Don't just leave it. The insulation's there for a reason. You're dealing with lethal voltages, or potentially lethal voltages. Right, so one thing I will do, I've got this dual wall insulation. This is just heat shrink, but it's got like a hot melt glue lining on the inside. So not only does it shrink, it actually seals at the same time. Things I really like about it is it's got an enormous shrink ratio compared to most heat shrinks that'll only come down to barely half their size. This stuff comes down to about a third. So that's good. That'll clamp neatly in here. Actually, it may not clamp neatly in here. That might be too thick. So if we hook that just inside there, it's also going to give some strain relief, some added strain relief, because these plugs are designed to, that little bridge in there is designed to push down and clamp. So I'm just going to double check that it will actually come down tight enough on it. Yep, it will. That's great. So I'm going to use that as an added bit of strain relief in there. It hooks on the inside. That's exactly what I was going for. Yep, sure. I knew that would happen. Right, so those two through there, earth through there. Now I'll always try and give the earth a little extra loop before I tie it on. Realistically, if this gets yanked and pulled out, the last wire you want to come off is the earth wire. I was taught to do mains plugs in the Air Force as part of my training many moons ago, and they always insisted on this. The last wire to come off is the earth wire. I don't have any modern training on mains devices, so the story may have changed in that time, but it seems reasonable to me to do it that way, so I do it that way. So that's that end of the cord. The other end will trim off and treat very, very similar. You can see this has a bit of rubber sleeving on it. We always called this Hallerman sleeving. There was a company called Hallerman. They made these pliers with 3 prongs, and when you squeeze the handles, the 3 prongs would separate. You had this Hallerman oil. You put oil on the prongs, slide it inside a bit of sleeving, squeeze the handle, which would stretch the tube, put it in place, let the handles off, and then slide it out, and the oil would let it go, and then you could slide this into place, and then the oil would kind of, I don't know, evaporate or absorb into the rubber or whatever. So that to me looks like that traditional Hallerman sleeving. So we used that in the Air Force many, many, many moons ago. I guess they used something similar at Radio Limited. But this time round we'll be replacing that with dual wall heat shrink tube. So I'll get that stripped off. Right, so that's the power cord soldered in. Next step. Alright, I apologise for the camera angle change. And the main thing I apologise for is that I didn't do it sooner. So, we're back into it. I'm going to quickly go through and do some recapping here, because these caps, whilst the set may still be working, certainly these caps will be on their way out, and paper caps have no place being left in a set that is being a daily driver. There's a lot of wax from these caps that's coming off, and the wax coming off tends to tell me that things are starting to go. So, alright, so we need a 0.02. I've got a 0.022. Now, I've had instances where these caps have been wildly off. Very rare, but it's just something I like to do, is just check them. So that is 0.0195, which is so close to 0.02 as to not matter. So that's going to replace here. And because this cap is so long, they've gone from this tag and they've run over to this earth strap here. Now I probably can't quite reach that with these leads. It'll be a real stretch. That's an earth point, but then so is this here. So I can actually put this cap between these two lugs here and achieve the same thing. And that's what I'm going to do, because this is a very small cap. It'll fit neatly there, and to run it stretched across there just makes no sense. It's not going to come off easy there. Now, one of the things I try and do, rather than just slap a component in, is place it carefully, A, so it looks tidy, and B, one of the things you want is to be able to see what value that cap is. So the next poor service guy that has to come in here is not going to have the benefit of these big tubular wax paper caps, which you can pretty much from any angle you can tell what it is, although these have all been put in really carefully by the looks of it, with the voltage rating and the value facing directly up. Every single one of them is fitted in a way that I can see what the value is. Now that's a level of care and attention that you don't see in a lot of sets, but Radio Limited were pretty good at the construction they did. It was probably something that the assembly people were told to do so that the testing people could actually just look and see at a glance what it was, but it makes a real difference. It makes it really nice that I can look in here and I can see every single value of every single capacitor staring me in the eyes. Now what I can't see the values of are these two. These have been replacements and they've just been slapped in. Had they actually put them like that, I could tell at a glance what those were, and I just, you know, I mean, it's a little thing, but it's all about the little things, right? Just bear that in mind. If you're working on a radio that I might have to work on one day, try and make it neat for me. Alright, so that sits, I think that sits really neat just there. Okay, so we're nearly done here. One of the power supply caps here is, I've just pulled that out of the way so I could get underneath it. That's got to be soldered back on. There is one last 0.01 hiding down here on the phono input, and the other one that I need to replace is this chassis mounted one here. So I've just had a quick look on Vintage Radio, and I do have the Model RCD loaded here. It's for a Courier radiogram, but it is the same chassis. We've got some dial string information and the chassis, the schematic, and you can see here on the EL41 output there is a 25 mic and 150 ohm, so that is 150 ohm, that resistor there. So what I'm going to do, I think, is go and find a little bit of tag strip, and I'll mount the tag strip on this centre pin, and then we'll just bring this resistor up and I'll mount a 0.25 across it, and that's going to basically replace that in a tidy, neat way. Once we're done there, we finished. Alright, so it's sitting back in the cabinet. We're all done. Get the bulb tester out here. It's got really cold in the last hour or so. The joys of working outside, and that cord's actually stiffened up. It's not all that flexible anymore. So we'll see how we go. Tuning is working. We're on radio. Got a little bit of volume and a whole lot of tone. Fire bulb. Switch on. And I found a second-hand bulb, fixed that bulb tester, that's working good. We've got almost nothing on the dim bulb, which is good. It's just starting to warm up now, so we should hear some crackling. Definitely working. I'm pretty happy that that's okay. Right, the reception's pretty appalling, but there's a couple of reasons behind that. One will be these lights. We've got LED lights, just cheap ones. Another one. It's just simply that this is a 5-valve set and we're out in the country and we're on the wrong side of the house for reception, so we'll just use me for an aerial for a bit.
About the armed response teams that we have had.
Well, that reception's pretty poor. Even for a 5-valve set I would expect it to be better, so I think I am going to have to go through an alignment on this.
Dan, hello.
Alright, so pull the gear out to do the alignment. I have printed off the service information, which would be nice to give to the guy. So I do have the schematic, which I didn't have before. Well, had on my phone, but it's nice to have a printed copy in front of me. And this has a whole bunch of service info. But important to me right now, it tells me that the IF is 460, which is good. So you'll see that I've got that set up over here, and it's just dropped down below. I've only just turned this on, we are sitting out in the cold, so that's 460.03, that's pretty close. And there's no pin numbers on the schematic, so I don't know what pin the grid is. So I couldn't find my little Phillips book, but one thing that you will find on the Vintage Radio project is that a lot of common valves I have linked in and put pinout information. So in this instance, what I want is the pinout information for initially for the EF41, which should be the IF, so that I can get the grid on that. If I do that, shrink it down a bit. Pin information. So that's built into the site. So if you haven't got a valve book handy, then like I say, most of the common valves I have uploaded. I don't have full data sheets for these valves, but what I do have is pinout information, and I try for all the common ones to have pinout information available, simply so you can do stuff like this. Right? Most people don't care about inter-electrode capacitance of certain valves, but people doing service work do probably care about what the pin numbers are and where they go, so that they can find the grids so that they can hook up their SIG-gens. Alright, so I'm not using an output meter on this, I'm tweaking this purely by ear because I'm not sure that this is actually going to require a great deal of tweaking. It is really slushy. Feels like really flat-topped response. So what you may or may not be able to see here is this is the first IF, which is a standard little Phillips side by side, and the second IF looks like a inductance specialist's. Oh god, it's the fucking neighbour with his fucking helicopter. Gee, didn't see that coming. So one thing to be wary of is tuning pegs on these can be pushed in and out. They'll just strip the tiny little threads on the tiny little brass rods, and then you find yourself tuning them with a pair of pliers on the top, just grabbing the top of the shaft and pushing it up and down, which is not really ideal. So try not to strip them, don't push too hard while you're doing the tuning. You need to push hard enough, obviously, to hold the screwdriver in. So that was pretty well bang on, that one. Right, so the IFs I think are pretty well bang on. What we're going to look at now is the antenna tuner, which will be this one. It's probably the padder down the back there, and this will be the oscillator one. And it's a begin. I get the feeling this Muppet's just going to fly around for the rest of the afternoon and make this basically impossible. Love thy neighbour, 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 love thy neighbour. Alright, so I've set that to 1.4. What I'm going to do is pop it back in the cabinet and see if I can just line up the dial. Unfortunately, there's no markings on here that I can use to actually align the dial, so I'm going to throw it back in and just check. There's also nothing in the service information that tells me which one's the padder, which one is the aerial. Yeah, and here he comes back again. Jesus. So actually that's not too far off. That was at 1400. And if I spin you around for a look, turn that on, that'll make it easier to see. So you can see where the needle is. It's just before 1400. So I'm going to give that a little nudge over. And right, that's bang on. So next thing I'm going to double check while we're here is the 600 mark. Alright, that's just shy of 600. Shut that down for a moment, take the chassis back out, and then we'll just tweak the patter. Right, so that should have us bang on now. So,
something abhorrent.
that channel should be coming through loud and clear. So I'm going to see if I can find a 6B6 and an EF41, which is our mixer oscillator and our IF, and just swap them out and see if that makes any difference, because there's something really not right there and it should be performing way better than it is. But it's working. I mean, it's working as well as an old 5-valve probably will out here, but I feel like these should work better. I may be just asking too much of it. No difference there. Now the other thing that I'm possibly being thrown off by, and I don't know, this station was always quite powerful, and assuming it still is powerful is possibly what's throwing me off here. Because if I drop down here to one of the Christian stations at the bottom end of the dial, that sounds clearish for where we are out in the country. Ream is the other one. Again, that sounds pretty clear. I'm going to have to sort that crackle that's driving me nuts. Talkback. Sounds pretty clear. It actually sounds better than it did before, but that could be psychosomatic. So my suspicion now is actually that station, which is at 739, used to be one of the more powerful stations that came through when they were doing music. And when Magic changed their format from music to talkback on 739, perhaps they dropped the power as well. All the talkback stations are fine. That one has gone to crap. And the happy clappy stations are there. Look, I actually think this is perfectly fine. There's not much more I can do to try and get things to come in any better. It's working as well as I would expect an older 5-valve set to operate. I would have maybe expected this to be just a little bit better, but I'm possibly asking a little bit too much given where we are. So I'm going to call that done. And what I'll do is I'll just get him to get back in touch with me and let me know if it's operating as well as he expects it to where he is, right in Christchurch City, where he's obviously going to be a lot closer to the aerials. I do kind of miss being close to the aerials. By the same token, I don't miss being in town at all. But the place I used to live, a couple of houses or so back, I was less than a kilometre as the crow flies from the mast that had about 3 of Christchurch's stations on it, and that was fantastic, particularly for playing with crystal sets, because you could, I had a crystal set set up that had a string of telephone handset speakers for the output, and I could basically drive it loud enough to hear it at the other end of the house. And the other thing I could do with that is experiment with different diodes. So because I had such high signal levels, I was able to use LEDs, I was able to use lumps of coal, I was able to use my pliers, a pair of rusty pliers, and I could just scrape a screwdriver across the top of the rusty pliers and use that as a detector. I could do all kinds of stuff, and I could get quite loud signal volume and see what the difference was. And somewhere I've actually got a video clip of me using an LED and the signal being so strong that the LED was flashing and pulsing with the signal. What I can tell you is an LED is a terrible detector. The audio quality is garbage, but it was pretty cool that a crystal set could actually run with an LED, and the LED would actually have enough voltage to light up just from the radio signal coming in off my long line aerial in my backyard. So that was pretty cool. We certainly can't do that here, and I haven't tried really to see whether my long line here will actually pick up anything on my crystal set. I imagine it probably will. One day I might pull that out and we'll have a go at it. Okay, but for now I think we're done with this one. I'm going to reassemble it, put it aside, and take a look at the STC.